This should prove to be an interesting video, one centered around the bet between two prominent figures of the dissident right, Auron MacIntyre and Academic Asian. And yes, you should be subscribed to both of them. I will link the channels down below. The bet seems simple enough, but the premise itself is rather intriguing, especially in the wake of the Democrats getting their asses handed to them on a golden Trump-stamped platter, as Auron explains here, well over a year ago. I have a running bet with a friend who believes wokeness will be put away because while our elites are evil, they are not stupid enough to be taken captive by an ideology that so clearly ends in civilizational suicide. I am going to win that bet. So we got to settle the conditions of the bet, because the more I read this, the more I found the parameters to be murky, as AA states here. 14th of May next year is the cutoff date. If the woke has intensified by then, Auron wins. However, if they're living through a UK general election in which both parties are trying to anti-woke each other during a non-woke presidency, then AA wins, with Auron adding some conditions as well. Victories on the right are not put in the woke away. A circulation of elites is definitely not put in the woke away. The bet was that the current establishment could not control their vanguard. So just to elaborate on this with a bit more detail, heavily emphasizing the bit part there, I'll give a very oversimplified bare-bones breakdown on what one can call the programming of the regime. Now, there's at least three noticeable tiers when it comes to the programming, amusingly explained through the use of magnets. The top tier are the magnet programmers. These would be the bigwigs, the architects of the narrative. Next up, the magnets themselves, the actors of the narratives. These would be the media class, the pundits, the journalists, so on and so forth. And lastly, the iron filings, the plebs that believe and get pulled by the magnets and the narrative, otherwise known as university students. And I've often pondered this myself, numerous times actually. Those that construct and purvey the narrative, do they need to essentially detox from this process periodically, or else they start swallowing their own propaganda and, proceed to go insane? Take, for example, when you look at the ungodly amount of immigration pouring into ethnically European populations, as well as parts of Asia, Japan take note, flooding the place with the third world and ignoring all of the obvious problems seems astonishingly disconnected with reality, which leads people to ask questions about the competence of the elite, as well as doing an awful lot of noticing. You can also notice a difference between some of the pundits who have left their respective spheres as well. Take a look at, say, Chris Cuomo. He sounds quite a bit different having left CNN. Contrast him with Don Lemon on the other hand, who also left CNN, who sounds exactly the same and is aging like milk. I think the power of the one ring that sustained Don Lemon was relevancy, and now that he is no longer at CNN, the decay is accelerating. And don't worry, Don, you still have very much in common with your former employers. You're both living on borrowed time. There's a whole bunch of interpretations to that joke. Choose the one you best find funniest. Now, the reason I brought all this up, aside from the fact that the betting makes everything more exciting, except when there's an unwanted pregnancy, I suppose, but anyway, is how will the regime react to the shellacking? Because there's bits and pieces floating about that serve both of their perspectives. Take, for example, the endless infighting and no one taking any responsibility for the clusterfuck that was that defeat. Which is also why I asked on X from either of them, is there some qualifying metric that settles the winner? And Auron put out this eyebrow-raising post recently saying, remember, the left can't course correct. Their ideology is destined to dismantle civilization and consume it until it dies. So there you have it, folks. Leftism is a cancer, quite literally. I don't know about all of you, but I'm not a fan of negotiating with cancer when it only has one function and one mode of operation. Moving on, with AA bringing up, I am not deliberately counter-signaling here, but the left course-corrected at least 3 times between 1979 and now. Now this to me is where the murkiness goes up a notch, and I'm curious what Auron means by course correction in the journey sense, because it seems to me that him and AA are somewhat speaking about two different things at the same time, because course correction is not changing the destination, only the journey to it. A journey off a cliff into a lake of fire postponed, course corrected and instead hit the plains and simply walking into the lake of fire is still suicide either way. So from this point of view, it seems to be more how overtly visible is the journey. Again, metric for measuring that might be a bit of a challenge. But this is also where the cutoff date is important because, as AA points out, they haven't gotten their firmware update yet. They will. Which is fair enough, really. They aren't going to flip like switches overnight, wholesale. Romans are built in a day, as the saying goes. But this is where the distinction of course correction comes into play, because the left considers moving away from their goal, which is off a cliff, a defeat, and reversing course an admission that they did something wrong. And given that this move is overwhelmingly feminine, the chances of that happening is slim and none, hence the still constant bickering. So what you're looking at ultimately here is an aesthetic change, a whistling of a different tune. The bet then hinges on the nature of the relationship between the programmers and the purveyors. Auron thinks the two have fused and become rather symbiotic, whereas academic agent thinks, no, they have to remain separate, learn to resubmerge and come to their senses, or else the entire narrative collapses, which in turn will fracture the stability of the regime. It's not a choice then, it's a necessity. How quickly the new firmware update takes place, if at all, we'll have to wait and see. If we assume AA's position of multiple course corrections over the span of about half a century is correct, then the resubmergence is inevitable. It's simply a continuation of a cycle. On the other hand, is there a case to be made the captains of the ships and their subsequent crews are too drunk and stupid, and they've been rendered unable to weather the storm as the final destination gets ever closer? Is there a point at which they can get too close, caught in a death spiral from which there is no escape? Or perhaps another point, can the networks themselves actually even survive without this sort of rhetoric, as they will hemorrhage money without their stupid drama-obsessed Trump drug, but also become increasingly even less reputable if they try all that again? Who knows, but keep in mind, Trump hasn't even taken office yet. There's still 2 months to go. So having said all of that, let me throw my controversial pitch here, one that I echoed on X as well. I suspect that maybe Auron might win, not because AA is wrong, far from it, but perhaps that May is too early for those slow-witted fuckwits to learn anything from this disastrous shellacking. But do tell me what you guys think. Cheers for watching, and once again, I apologize for nothing.